So far, we've discussed new orders for non-defense capital goods, using that as our leading indicator of business investment in plant and equipment. Now it's time to turn to inventories. Inventories are stocks of goods. You can think of them as stocks of goods on the shelf. But category or definition is even broader than that. These can be finished goods waiting for sale, or stocks of raw materials awaiting processing, or goods in the process of production. Now, when it comes to inventories, stocks of goods, we're only really talking about manufacturing and trade. We're talking about manufacturing production, wholesale and retail trade. Other sectors of the economy don't really use inventories to any significant degree, and therefore their holdings of stocks of goods are not measured. Now, there's an interesting dichotomy here. Individual firms use inventories to smooth out the production process. Indeed, some couldn't survive without inventories. Try to think of retail establishments. Could the supermarket exist without stocks of goods, milk and meat and vegetables? Clearly not. How would you shop? Think of retail clothing establishments. Could they sell their wares without racks of clothes? Think of a lumber mill. A lumber mill will have logs awaiting for processing, logs in the process of being milled, finished lumber product waiting in the yard to be shipped. Obviously, the mill can't work hand to mouth. An order comes in, it needs to ship. And so the production process works smoothly. The shipments are discontinuous. Goods are shipped, and then there may not be another order. Goods are shipped, may not be another order. And so an individual establishment will use inventories to smooth out the production process for itself. But this presents an irony, because all those individual firms using inventories to smooth out the production process actually makes the production process less stable for the economy as a whole. Here's how it works. Let's take the upsurge, an upswing of the economy. In that stage of the business cycle, business firms begin to replenish and build their inventories. And if they think that the boom will be very strong, individual firm does not want to be caught short without enough goods to sell. So the individual manufacturing firm may very well build its inventories in the expectation of larger orders in the future. No lumber mill wants to be left without enough finished lumber to ship. No lumber mill wants to be left without enough logs in its yard waiting to be milled. Now, obviously, if all firms begin to build inventories in order to anticipate future sales, production must rise more rapidly than sales, because some of that output goes into inventories. And so the consequence is that as each firm uses inventories in order to anticipate sales and smooth out the production process for itself, output grows more rapidly than sales. And as output surges and capacity utilization rises and costs rise and production facilities are strained, the cycle and actually becomes exacerbated rather than attenuated. And so the consequence of every firm building its inventories is rapidly rising production and rapidly rising costs. And if the costs are rising rapidly enough and prices begin to rise, then that provides another incentive for firms to build inventories. And the consequence of that, of course, is that as firms see prices rise, firms have an incentive to add goods to inventory before prices rise, because every firm would rather add goods to its inventory of merchandise for sale when the costs are low, and then reap a gain when it sells the goods at higher prices in the future. And so the consequence is, as all these firms begin to produce more and more and build their inventories, then of course production rises more rapidly than sales. It's a self-fulfilling process as costs rise, and as a result inventories build and build and build as the cycle nears its peak. Now, inventories are not cost-free. Business firms are tying up their capital in inventories. These are funds they could deposit and earn interest upon, or these are funds they must borrow in order to build the inventories. The inventories carry a capital or interest cost. Now, once the cycle breaks and the downturn begins, all of a sudden firms realize that they don't need as many inventories as they had anticipated. But as sales fall faster than they anticipated, some of their product goes into inventory involuntarily. So you have the involuntary buildup of inventories even as firms are trying to cut back sales. Then if panic sets in, firms on a wholesale level begin to dump their inventories. And as they dump their inventories, they cut back production severely. And thus, on the downswing of the cycle, production falls even more rapidly than sales. And as sales contract, production falls even more swiftly, and the recession is even worse. So the consequence of inventories throughout the business cycle and throughout the progress of the cycle is, even if individual firms use inventories to smooth out the cycle, in the aggregate, inventories make the cycle that much worse. We'll see as we examine the figures.